Much like the original Final Fantasy before it, Kingdom Hearts starts by having you select your class, though it'd be perfectly understandable if you missed it. In Tutorial Land, or the Dive to the Heart as the series likes to call it, you learn how to move and are then asked to pick one of 3 weapons, and to cast aside one of the remaining 2. The game never explains what this choice means. If you're familiar with these types of games, you could probably intuit that picking the sword will give you a bonus to strength, and casting aside the shield will have a negative impact on your defense, but that's only half the story. This choice also determines the order in which you learn skills. For example, if you want the scan ability as early as possible in order to see enemy health, you need to pick the sword. Considering that you only need to be level 40 or 50 for the final boss, or 1 if you're just incredible at the game, this is essentially picking a class. The sliding dash ability is available to sword at level 6, shield at 39, and staff at 51. And that will have an impact on how you play the game. Sword players will have it integrated into their playstyle from early on, since it will be one of the few options available to them. After playing much of the early game with it on, it will feel odd to take it off later. Shield players will get it late in the game when they've already figured out how they like to play. They might try integrating it, but it seems less likely to me. Staff players could easily get through the entire game without ever seeing it. Again, the game never mentions what this initial choice means, or lists out what abilities you could get when depending on your choice. And then there's the leveling track. Hello world, my name is Atticus, and welcome to the experiment. Later on in Tutorial Land, a third of the main FF10 cast and also Selphie will ask you a couple of questions like, what are you most afraid of? Typical friend stuff. And you get 3 options to respond to each of their questions. Once you've given your answer, the game gives you a cryptic poem and moves on. What you have just done is very important to your gameplay experience. What you have just done is select your leveling track. Picking the top options has you level quicker early on and slower later. Picking all the middle options is a balanced experience throughout, and the last options make leveling tougher early, but a breeze later. These correspond to the morning, midday, and night poems respectively. I cannot stress this enough, the game never tells you what any of this means. I don't mean this to sound like a critique, I love this, and that is probably my absolute worst design take. Hiding lore, story, even entire gameplay sections can work out really well for a game. It's part of what makes the Soulsborne titles so interesting. But when that extends to the mechanics, there's an issue. Elden Ring has a list of buffs and debuffs that are currently applied to your character, listed under your health and stamina, but to my knowledge, you can't see what any of the symbols correspond to. That's usually alright, as most of them come from your equipment, and they do follow a standard library, like what the symbol is comprised of will tell you what the buff or debuff does, but you don't know that library. The game does not explain it. That's usually alright, as most of them come from your equipment, but there is at least one debuff that you get from having a certain item in your inventory. And while some dialogue you hear once hints at what the debuff is, the game never outright tells you. You can get this debuff pretty early, and it reduces your maximum health, which could make the start of an already difficult game needlessly more difficult. To be clear, I don't think it's good that Elden Ring reduces your HP without explicitly telling you. But I do like that Kingdom Hearts has you pick your progression paths without telling you what you've done. It's a fine line, is I think the point here. Another title that does something similar is Tactics Ogre Let Us Cling Together, the spiritual predecessor to Final Fantasy Tactics. In the original Super Famicom release, the game opens with a short questionnaire asking you to pick a prayer, sacrifice, and conviction out of 12 options for 4 deities. Once you've made these choices, you pick one of the deities to be your patron deity. This choice determines your starting stats. No matter what you pick, your character will have a stat total of 220, but you can influence it so that you start the game more magic or melee oriented, letting you get a jump start on your preferred build. I haven't beaten Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together, or Tolict for short, but when I fired up the game recently, the fact that I was picking starting stats was not made clear, and I certainly did not know what any of the choices might do. It might be explained later, but that'd be a mite late. They remade the game later for the PlayStation Portable and decided that this stat selection didn't make sense in the then modern age, so they changed it to tarot. In the PSP version, you get 5 tarot cards drawn at random and pick between 3 options for each of them. At the end, you pick one of the cards, and depending on the specific option you pick for that card, you get different starting stats. Choosing a class in other games is rarely accompanied with such pomp and circumstance. In the original Final Fantasy, you make a similar contextless choice, but you are aware of the choice you're making. You get your 4 Warriors of Light, you name them, and you pick a class. From the game alone, you don't necessarily know what any class will be like, but Final Fantasy and the media that inspired it are prevalent enough that I don't think it's a stretch to assume a new player will have an idea of what each class is like. The Soul series similarly has you pick a class at the start of the game, but they lay out everything that choice entails. Your starting stats and equipment right on the character creation screen. These both have great clarity, but are very gamey. They're reminiscent of reading through the D&D player handbook for what class will be best to play. While terrible as a gameplay mechanic, the class selection in Tolict, and especially Kindom Hearts, add an incredible sense of wonder and mystery. You start Kindom Hearts, a game with a wild premise to begin with, on some Disney-themed stained glass. You're told to take up one weapon and cast away another, and then you learn how to fight with that weapon. You teleport from the Disney glass to an island with Final Fantasy characters who ask you about your hopes and fears. You get a cryptic poem, and we never talk about it again. A weird thought, a strange dream. It works incredibly well in preparing you for a lot of the weirdness to come. As strange as it can be to see classic Disney properties and Final Fantasy-esque stories, nothing tops the very start of the game. As a story-focused title, this bizarre method goes a long way in establishing tone. A simple selection screen would have worked just as well mechanically, but I'm glad they chose to go this route. I would honestly like to see more games do this. If you're making a game that has a class selection or stat allotment choice at the very beginning, consider a surrealist, Dadaist questionnaire instead of a straightforward select screen. At the very least, you'll stand out for doing something odd. I have been Atticus, and thank you for participating.